Oh, really? Well, we're about
I couldn't even
30.
go in my ice water. I'm gonna have to go down to the cryotherapy place to get my fix on. All right, you ready to
Oh,
come out of
really?
this? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
That's 160 below.
Oof.
So I go from 160 below for 3 minutes over to the infrared sauna, 155 above for 50 minutes.
Oh,
That's
dude,
how I
be
maintain
careful.
this beautiful hair. Hi, welcome to Control Talk Now, your smart buildings video cast and podcast for the week ending February 16th, 2020. This is episode 350. We keep rocking and rolling, and we appreciate our audience. But hey, our audience appreciates my co-host and yours, the man, the myth, the legend, the one, the only, Kenny, Secret Agent Man Smyers. And our audience, Kenny, wants to know, did you survive Valentine's Day?
Well, yeah, because it was a very, very nice, quaint Valentine's Day. I did not forget. I was right on top of it with a small surprise for my wife. We're actually traveling, so that it was couldn't put the flowers together because I just stay home and wilt while we were going. But how about you? Would you get your sweetie something
Dude, I
appropriate?
forgot again, man. It's so treacherous, man. This is, you think smart buildings or business or war is treacherous. I mean, Valentine's Day, man. You forget you're in the doghouse. You get the wrong gift, you're in the doghouse. You say the wrong thing, you're in the doghouse. Let's just say I'm in the doghouse and let it go at
Well,
that.
you know
That's
what?
all I
You
have to
should
say
fix that
about that.
doghouse up by now. You should get yourself some good lamps and maybe a TV and just
Dude,
hang out.
another word for the doghouse is the man cave. So why
Right.
do you think I
Well,
started Control Talk Now? Spending so much time alone, and this is my only
hey, I know that room that you're
opportunity
in
to
right
have
now. That's a
that.
studio. That's not a
Yeah.
doghouse. Everybody.
Well, but I have to do Control Talk. It's my way of talking to people while I'm in the quote unquote doghouse. So, but anyway, dude, it's exciting stuff. You and I are both recovering from AHR and the Control Trends Awards, and man, just how do you feel about it? Being about a week removed from it.
Well, it used Jim Young's explanation about decompressing. There was just so many things, so much activity, so many conversations, and so much excitement, and so many pictures now. The video is going to be done here shortly. The 7 minutes of magic, capturing the incredible event, the two parts, the Control Trends Awards and the Super Bowl fun, and just seeing some of those pictures. That we still got to get pictures to everybody, but they're coming. Please be patient. And then the trophies are coming too, so still some aftermath. But I feel good that it's behind us. And again, we're already marching towards Chicago for 20. It'll be 2020, and of course, all year in review. So it's going to be January something or other at 2021. But the Control Trends community really said a lot of good things about what we did. We're very fortunate that we're aligned with a lot of people that are like-minded. To include Ken St. Clair and some of the other stalwarts of the industry that are doing this thing for the industry that makes the documentation. Nothing's done until the paperwork's done, and I think we're helping to achieve literally capturing the people and the esprit de corps, the zeitgeist, the times, what was going on, what
Whoa,
happened.
whoa, 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 whoa! Did you just drop a vocab word? Zeitgeist,
Yeah,
dude.
German,
Define
dude.
it, please.
Zeitgeist is basically the spirit of the times. What's going on, what was important, the trends. Control Trends is such a cool name because it literally means that there are going to be things that are in the forefront, and they're moving from the front burner to the back burner, and then maybe back to the front burner. But it's a changing environment. It's moving forward, and we just watched all this incredible technology where we talked about OT. What's OT? Operational technology. IT, IoT, very clever. But now we're getting to see the technologies coming to the forefront. We're seeing controllers being changed to the IoT devices. I mean, it just keeps rolling forward.
Dude, are you advocating we change the name of the show from Control Trends to Control Zeitgeist?
No, absolutely.
You doyen of vocabulary words. You're such a Zeppelin.
Absolutely not.
You're
No, Control
such
Trends
a
is staying.
Zeppelin, man. I tell you
But
what, like a Led Zeppelin. There you go, brother. All right, but yeah, you're right. You're right, man. It's all changing, and man, we're right in the thick of it. And hey, speaking of being in the thick of it, Kenny Smyers, we have the aforementioned Ken Sinclair teed up and ready to go. So how about introducing him?
love to. It's and the editor and owner of AutomatedBuildings.com. It's the one and only Ken St. Clair. Ken has gone a step above his Notre Dame, and now he's gone metaphysical. He's now Aristotle Sinclair because he brought in a new concept of I struggle daily with how old I would be if I didn't know the day I was born, and that was the opening for his editorial thing. And I'll tell you what, that starts our show off on the right foot, right direction. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, I'm promoting this philosophy. If I go senile before I grow old, will I really grow old?
Well, it's a great question. No, because I mean, you think about it, Ken, and I love this, man. We're starting out already with philosophy because, I mean, we've all had the experience, time is relative, right? We've all had the experience of being late for a meeting and we're stuck in traffic and a minute seems like an hour. And then we have also, if we're lucky, had maybe an experience, and I won't go into which kind, where, an hour seems like a minute. So it is relative. And I think that has to do with aging. But how did you get on this, buddy? What got you thinking about this?
I don't know. I actually picked up, as you imagine, I have to read a lot of bits and pieces to pull together all this stuff that I'm writing, because I'm just like everybody else. I'm just trying to get a grasp of what the heck is going on, and every day you run into it. But it seems more and more our business is becoming more about those darn people in the building and how they interact and how they feel, and we're becoming sort of touchy-feely, which is pretty hard stretch for Krusty the Clown consultant that I was, and was pretty digital in my decisions in the past. So now I have to be a little more.
Don't hard on yourself, Ken.
Yeah.
But the cognito ergo sum, when I read that, that's what I thought about Rene Descartes and the I think, therefore I am. But, it is so relative, Eric, to your point. The best story ever about time I heard was a mine cave in Germany where the engineer had a clock, and he did some calculations about how much oxygen was still available for how many miners were there. And he said, oh, we got about 24 to 36 hours of oxygen left here. So the first thing he did was he took away the factor of time. So nobody knew how much time had gone. And so 30 some of these miners survived 4 days with oxygen that he had calculated would only last 24 hours. Wow. There was a couple engineers down with him. The only person that passed away in this thing was the person that was doing the timekeeping and fooling everybody else.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it gets back to a concept that Ken Notre Dame Sinclair invented, which is, think about it. We had the placebo thermostat with temperature. We all remember those days when you put the dummy thermostat on the wall where people could adjust it and most of your complaints went away. So Ken Sinclair, then I think the operative question becomes, how do we come up with the placebo time stat or something like that, where you feel like, because again, we're all getting older, so we're kind of at least in the second half, if not the final quarter. So these things become very relevant to us. So how can we slow it down? And is there an opportunity for somebody to build this into a building?
I don't think so. Things sounds sort of like a time warp or something like that. So I'm not sure that's going to happen. But the bottom line is we certainly are talking a lot more about how people feel. I'm almost coming to the conclusion, after being 50 years in the temperature control business, that it has nothing to do with temperature. It's just how we feel about whether it's too hot, too cold, and all of these things are. And even around our house, I'm getting more and more of that. I'm getting more situations where I sit down, I turn on a heater, not whether I'm cold or not. I want the heater on. So it's interesting how that's starting to play out, and that doesn't necessarily cost more energy. Sometimes it costs less, because the other time is then you don't bother turning it on, and it's starting to get quite cool. And there's been some surveys in the past about that, and in buildings where they had manual control of the air conditioning, and then they put in automatic control, and it actually used more energy. And when they interviewed the people, they basically ran the air conditioning based on time of day, based on what they were doing. They turned it on for supper. They turned it on when they watched TV. They weren't allowed. They didn't allow themselves to run it during the day, and they did all of these good things. So our relationship between machines, I think, is much more powerful than we have acknowledged in the past. Anyway,
Comfy did that study too with the zoning, and they found out that people, when they had access to the air conditioning and the heating, and they did get the opportunity to go 10 minutes of heat, 10 minutes of cool, they found out that as soon as that person was now very conscientious of how much energy they were using, how much cooling they were using, how much heating they were using, and it turned out that they were misers. They actually were, so they actually saved more by enabling the people to control the heating and cooling, instead of people wasting it, leaving it on all day and walking out of the office with it still on. They actually were very conscientious of it, and when they felt comfortable again, and as you said, the mood and the physiological makeup has more to do with it probably than the actual temperature. And
I think that's been really well said by Mark Peacock in his engagement platforms. That's become an iconic graphic now that people are using in all kinds of other discussions. And the idea that the building is definitely going to have an engagement platform that is going to start bringing in wayfinding, whether the people are in the building, and we're starting to probably even see apps as to how they're feeling and that side of it. These iconic graphics I find interesting. I was wanting to talk about that today too, is every once in a while when I'm doing automated buildings, there comes a graphic is so simple and so straightforward that it's going to become part of our history when I look back of the 20 years of stuff that we've featured. I see these particular graphics that just sort of leap out, and the engagement platform one that Mark created was a great one. And the other one, the new one that hit me, is the one the kids presented in the open session, the layer cake. I thought that was an amazing, powerful graphic that showed this piece of cake, and it showed all of the levels of where they saw open occurring. And then, ironically enough, they saw proprietary products with the icing on the cake, but the underneath elements of how they work, which really nobody cares about. Nobody cares exactly how all of that gets computed. They see that as the basic filling or the basic structure of the cake. Interesting graphic, very powerful. So
well, listen, let's talk about engagement, because you were the most engaged man, I think, at AHR, maybe in AHR history. I mean, was it 12, 14 sessions that you moderated or
12.
set up? 12. Okay. So I think, I think it bears fruit. I mean, because all this stuff is related to stuff you were talking about at AHR. For the people who missed it, tell them what they missed. Let's walk through some of those sessions and what were some of the ones that impressed you most, and talk to us about some of the insights gained there.
Probably the big picture observation for me is we were there as our 21st year of presenting at AHR, and so you've got a bit of a span of being able to see what's gone on in the industry. I think in the past, I've always been sort of talking to myself. In the last few years, I've opened up with my contributing editors, and wow, my contributing editors are becoming incredible, powerful people in the industry. Actually, not that they weren't before, but their attachment to automated buildings is what sort of grew the 12 sessions, and it also grew the sessions and took each one of them a different direction. And each one of them is, individually a industry leader, and it's great to see these young ones taking their position and starting to redefine our industry. It's just great. So found that amazing. And Scott Cochran did an amazing job for us, just presenting a call. I think we got to call him a betweener. He's old enough to know what we know, and young enough to relate to what's coming up. And I think he did a great job of filling in all in between.
Yeah, he did do a great job, Ken. You're right about that. Very impressed with Scott Cochran.
Yeah, actually, and actually, thank you thank you very much to Control Trends, because you I can't watch all of these 12 sessions because I'm great at throwing balls in the air, but I'm not so great at catching them. And so I basically missed a lot of these sessions, and so my only touch with the sessions is to watch Control Trends. And so I do really appreciate the fact that you actually capture these things. And so I sat down and watched Scott's extinction of the control contractor, and it was amazing. Some of the stuff that was coming out of that. So that was like a great session. Not even all that much a part of it, but certainly got to share it. And he and tied that all back into all the stuff that we'd done before. So it kind of made it, I don't know, somehow with all these guys, we look a lot smarter than we actually are. So I think I think you guys talk about that too, is surround yourself with successful people and you will be successful. And wow, these guys are amazingly successful.
Well, they did it. And I think it was a very timely session, that Scott Cochran led with Brian Oswell and another gentleman from San Diego that, are top-notch integrators. About to sneeze. And I think it definitely, you want to watch that, just because if these guys are right, business as you know it is not going to be the same. And if you pay attention to what they're saying, you really have an opportunity to catch on to this new trend and be in position to take advantage of these changes.
Excuse me. Sorry about that. Yeah, and in addition to that, what's kind of rolling around in my mind, because I'm never, as you know, I'm never in the moment. I'm somewhere trying to imagine how the moment is going to change next. And I think there are some really radical changes coming up that are, I think probably one of the toughest jobs in the world right now is being a master systems integrator. There's a strong desirability to be one, and I think there's a great business in being one, but to actually fulfill what you have to do to become a master systems integrator is a really tough task. The biggest thing you've got is just what I always call functional creep, is that every time you touch something, there's another thing you have to integrate. And of course, that gets into these engagement platforms and all the things that are not actually probably going to be done by our industry, but need to be integrated into our industry, such as wayfinding would be a quick example of that. So we've got that going.
Well, hang on. I want to hop in here real quick, and sorry to interrupt. Hold that thought.
Yeah.
But I think there might be one part of the chain that's even more difficult than a master systems integrator. Because the thing about a master systems integrator to me is, yeah, you have to be on your toes, but there's a huge demand for a good master systems integrator. I think the toughest position right now, and Kenny, you can chime in on this, and Ken too, is being a manufacturer. Because there are so many people that are manufacturing the controls and the parts and pieces. And that's where I think it's harder to differentiate, because there's so many choices.
Well, I wanted to go real quick, Ken, back to what you said about Market Talk. Real quick for our Control Trends community. What's that stuff when you give the listener and the viewer some staple data, Eric? It says the building engagement platform combines the previous platform generations on a flattened and secured IP horizontal architecture with touch points, tools, ingestion of real-time data streams, workplace applications. It streamlines efficiencies, manages workflows, allows for collaboration and information sharing in order to meet the occupant experience expectations, drive new service deliveries, and produce new outcomes. The most important perspective resulting in the building engagement platform is the relationship between technology and outcomes and the roles each play in driving value. So Ken, you had mentioned that Mark came up with some really good stuff in a graphic that explained engagement. But so what we're looking at now is a holistic approach. We used to talk about temperature, and you're right, that's just a tiny little percentage point of what's really important. And when we're talking about the metaphysical thing, I think the most important thing that you've said in this theme of this February theme, what it means to me is that people have to change behavior. They have to change their behaviors in order to fit into it. Like you're saying about Scott Cochran being in between, knowing the old school and marrying it to the new school. I think he has a very receptive approach towards it. But he too is saying that the real problems we're having in our industry, and it will take you right to that vendor thing about them having a hard, difficult time, is we can't get people to change their behaviors quickly enough to realize and then lead and take their part of the responsibility forward in the right direction, instead of being, staying in their sweet spot and not going with technology and trying to drive out more the final year of value in their old platforms. So I think the things that you're talking about in your February editorial, when you break them down, and you did break them down as breakouts, by the way, are that if you're not ready to change your behavior and to do what you said, to be reborn, born again, connected, I think that is really truly the crux of it. Is you have to say to yourself, today, I'm not going to come in there with these old, driven rules that this is how it's done. I'm going to listen to young people, listen to new people, adopt new technology and embrace it, and find a new way to make a living with it.
Great. Yeah, and I think that loops back to what Eric was asking. Is he saw as he said, the toughest part is for the people making the products. Ironically enough, this whole born connected thought, if you kind of get your mind around that, we're out on the floor and we're looking at this new product, and they're selling it over here in one direction for the residential market, and we're kind of scratching our heads how it would be of use to us. And then they, by the way, mentioned, oh, by the way, it's all built on haystack tagging. It's also built on supports BACnet standards and supports any other standards that we've sort of heard of. And the reason is they've just bought an open Raspberry platform, and all of this stuff has been ported to it. So this thing was born connected. It's got all this stuff. They didn't even know what that stuff was. We were telling them, wow, that's amazing. And it's like, is it? I don't know. It just came with the thing. So what's happening in the making a new product? You guys are old enough to remember the microprocessor days when products were born with microprocessors and no longer had pneumatic controls inside them. And it was kind of a radical shift. And now we've got exactly the same thing with the microcomputers. And that's what's happening, is the microcomputers are coming with this, and it's like a checklist. It's like, okay, what are you going to use for an operating system? Unix. Are you going to support Haystack? Yeah. Are you going to support BACnet? Yeah. Load those
Wireless
things up.
Yep.
Now this thing is born with what we've been fiddling for 20 years to try and get some of this stuff into standards. We've actually achieved that. So it's like a leapfrog. So they basically, well, that's a given. Why would I wouldn't buy a product that I couldn't load that in, and I won't buy a product that I can't load it in after. If I need a Haystack stack, I'll basically go to an open source GitHub and drag it and put it inside my controller. My controller is soft, my controller is open, and that's what the kids are talking about, is that bottom layer of the controllers. Then the icing on the cake, and the reason you get to sell that controller is basically your proprietary. So all the innovation is in the top. The workings of how the sensors interface, how it communicates, how it's connected, those are all the layers of the layer cake. So it was kind of funny. So some of this stuff kind of came together. I'm not sure I was getting that as clear as it was. But the biggest thing was going out to the floor and having this guy trying to sell us a product. And then, it's got Haystack. Yeah, it's got that. Yeah, it's like, is that important? What would we use that for? And he's coming from a domestic market, which, Haystack in a domestic market is, probably doesn't have any value, but it's in the product because that's the microprocessor, microcomputer that we've chosen.
Well, Ken, hang on a second. I think you're hitting on something really, really, really important. It's the definition of open is changing. I think especially for our vendors, this is a key piece, because it sounds like open is much more than, open protocol, open source where you can get the product. Now it sounds like it's almost like open means a selectable menu for your controller. Open means customizable, right? Where you can, pick and choose what you want and download it. Like you said, the soft controller. So that to me is, if that is truly the way things are going, that is a pivot point for manufacturers. If I'm designing control systems, I've got to sort of rethink what it's going to be like. Agree or disagree? Am I missing something here, Kenny? Or
No,
is
you're
that,
absolutely you're
Yeah,
right
I
on
agree.
it. And ironically enough, if you listen, not listen to, but if you're part of all 12 sessions and you're kind of seen, I could not believe how all the 12 sessions fit together. I mean, we've got Scott. His common message all the way through was RS 485 is dead. Everything is IP. Okay, so obviously, if I'm designing a new product, it's like, okay, I to have any of those old networks or Modbus or any of that stuff, that's doesn't make any sense. So now I need an IP controller. When I go to buy an IP controller, we're looking at Raspberries, BeagleBoards, myriad of these processors. They all have the ability to load in the same software. And when Alper does his demo, he shows that I can load this into this platform and that platform. And in some of the discussions I was in, was the thing is, yeah, no, it runs on that. And there's a few problems on that system, but it's pretty good. And but the point is they just load all this stuff, just like you do your laptop, because that's what it is basically every one of these controllers is a laptop now. So what do you want to load up? What do you want to put into it? And you want to customize it. Like your laptop is different than Ken's laptop and is different than my laptop because we have different tasks we do, and yet we do the same product. Yet we can share PowerPoint, we can share Word.
right?
And that's what they're saying. So why shouldn't the controllers be like that?
Right.
Why can't we just simply bunch all that together?
But again, I want to mark another point here because we're talking about Alper Uzman from BASSG, and I tell you what, Ken, as near as I can tell, out of all the people that sort of get it and are actually doing it, it seems like Alper is almost a poster child for what is possible. I think, Kenny, we got to rename him Alper Einstein. What do you think?
Well, he sure is smart, but I mean, there's a couple guys doing it. Contemporary Controls was the first ones that I think really caught my attention, doing exactly what Ken St. Clair just said. In other words, and again, to Eric's point, Ken, I congratulate you bringing that born connected, what that definition meant, because I think a lot of people, when they read, some of the articles and some of your editorials, I don't think they dig deep enough to really understand what's being said there. And that is that when this controller comes out of the box, it's born. Its first episode, its first entry to the market is it's so loaded with capabilities. It's so connected. It's so open that you could take any part of it. And we've seen some controllers now that are doing it. Eric and I had a couple conversations with some new people that are introducing controllers to our market, and it's fascinating. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It has every single protocol possible in Ocean, Wi-Fi, Zigbee. It's got Modbus, Modbus RTU, Modbus, IP. I mean, it's got BACnet, and I agree too that the IP controllers are going to start really dominating all new projects, and from now on, telephone wires. They're making fun of MSTP now, calling it telephone wire, and so that if you don't bring a controller to market quickly enough that has this Army Swiss style of I can do this coming in and do this coming out, and of course I can do that, and of course I'm cyber secure, so that it really makes it a challenge to project. I always look at stuff. I remember trajectories and we used to do math where we would have to figure out how you can dock this thing that's orbiting the Earth and this one being sent up into space. And it was one of the math problems we had as a group that we played spent a month figuring out. How do you run down the football field and catch this thing? If you're a defensive player, your avenue of pursuit has got to be so far, years. I mean, how do you predict building a product, what's going to be important, what's going to sell, what's going to be marketable? I mean, to Eric's point, that's got to be just, an extraordinarily challenging position.
Great lead in with the football field. It's easy, Ken. You just make all the players open. And if all the players are open, you can throw the ball to anybody. I don't know if you remember the old days of microprocessors when we had a software glitch and we used to have to go out and press a new chip into 1,000 controllers. Did you ever have to do that or ever have to be part of that? Okay. Then came controllers that were able to be reprogrammed from a central point. And that was like, oh, wow, this is just, so now what we've got is the next level of that is we can have a job that we forgot to add Haystack, and now the owner is becoming very passionate about Haystack. We can actually start adding Haystack drivers into those existing controllers. Everything that was configurable before is becoming soft now. And we're used to the idea. We don't get annoyed when our phone updates, because to bring it up, it's a brand new phone. Oh, look at that. They moved this over here and they moved that over there, and it actually, most part, works better than it did before, other than we always grumble that it does. But in the final analysis, it's more secure. And that's another big thing, is the security of these systems. If we do find a hole in them, if we can push a button and reload a patch into 1,000 controllers, that's the way it's got to happen. We can't go out and physically do that. So yeah, so keep all the players open, and I think you're going to see.
Sorry, Ken. I got to just say something, because you say all this amazing stuff, and it just takes me a minute to catch up. But getting back to Kenny's football analogy and what you're saying about everybody just needs to be open. I mean, because part of, if you're a vendor or a distributor or even a contractor, I mean, part of your strategy, using the football metaphor, is, you play offense, but you also play defense, protecting what you already have. And what you're saying, what I'm hearing is, forget about playing defense. It's, you can't anymore. You just got to be the best offensive team on the field, meaning you're more open, you're more accessible, you have more stuff. So, proprietary is a way of playing defense. Can you help me with the metaphor here?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because we watched this thing step up. It used to be you played to a protocol, so everybody had the LAN works in the back there. Then you played to a network. You had MSTP and you had RS-45, and then you had IP, and then now you're playing into web-enabled, so that every single thing is an IoT device versus connecting to a network, and then let the supervisory controller connect you to the web or to the cloud or whatever. So we're seeing this remarkable transition from everything being an IP-based controller, IoT device or whatever, on a network, not going through any of the steps, the architectural layers, that, not to confuse it with the layers that your guys were talking about from the breakout session, but we used to have what we had in architecture, and it would go down, and or you had field level devices, you had sensors and end devices going to field level devices, going to supervisory devices, going to server, and then going to the cloud. And it'd be a nice little diagram. It was this big, and it, made a really cool presentation, because and now that presentation has shrunk so that you're going right from the whatever it is, a sensor that has an IP address on it, or FTO4, it's wireless, and it's going right. It's getting its information directly from the web, telling it what the weather is and what the sun position is, and it now outputs based on that input it's getting from the web, and controlling an analog output that's moving the blinds and whatever. And it's extraordinary in that case. So to your point, Eric, I almost thought that there was a magic thing where on a football field, you had offense and defense, and if the guy was running down the field and he couldn't get to him, he could throw himself into the body ahead of him or convert one of the people that was on offense closest to the runner and become that person, and then start, what's that one, the Terminator, they do that. Remember, he jumps from person to person. When you said that, Kenneth, that was what came in my mind. That's pretty dang cool. If you could be the guy chasing the person, instead of relying on being offense or defense, you could change the team player to become to be the closest person to pursue the ball carrier. But we're talking about a lot of really heady stuff here, and it's so interesting. And I think that was the nature of your February theme, was get out of your head, born again connected. I mean, you're introducing a requirement for people to learn very quickly and succinctly what is going on in our world, because if you're not advancing at this pace, you're probably really not on top of it. You're probably really not really aware of the disruption, the degree of disruption. You're aware of disruption because things are happening, but you're not, when you go to make your move, if you're not prepared and understand that new customers or big customers are expecting this born ready to be literally born ready, meaning that controller that they're paying all that money for better not have any of these inhibitions in them, or these proprietary gateway that blocks them from getting what they want. They're looking for this born ready controller, and there are people that are trying to design that born ready controller. And to your point, they weren't even in our business. They were in a residential. You said more of a company that generates or makes products for things that belong to residences now are looking over and saying, you know what, our controller can probably do what you're looking for, because we already have this embedded. We already have all this, and plus we have an open stack. So if you do find out you need something in there, an API, whatever, we've got room for you to put it in here and just add it to whatever we already have provided for you. So that
Okay, when you were talking about the architectures, something flashed through my mind. The architecture, it's a complicated architectures we have. This one talks to that one. And if you want to just quickly put that back into the football, I don't know much about football, but I kind of watch those guys running around. And one problem is they basically, they all have a particular purpose on the field. If everybody's open, we can put the ball to anybody. We can change the strategy that was drawn on the chalkboard. We can change that strategy on the fly. So that's the significant part of that. Is in the old days we basically moved into being able to program these things to do anything. The controller, and we thought that was so amazing. Now we're actually be able to program how these things interact in the system. They typically look the same. They're all little Raspberry Pis or Beagle boards or something like that. They're basically a little Unix platform, which is another very significant thing, is that typically everybody's running Unix rather than Windows or Apple or any of this stuff. They're using industrial strength computing. But let me take it on. I'd like to move out of that. I think that's a given. We're seeing that these little open devices, new products are being born open. You can imagine if you're making anything, it's got to be connected. That's the other thing is that if I'm making an exhaust fan, it has to be connected. If I'm making a big ass fan, it's got to be connected.
Yeah.
So it's so that and it's cheap enough to do it, and they can either provide it as a cloud service or they can provide it as a phone service, and typically they have to do all of that. So back to the master systems integrators. So they've got all of this stuff. They've got their traditional thing, which was an amazing field to try and pull all of that together. Now we've got born connected devices floating in that now have to be integrated. On the other side of it, we've got the engagement platform, and we're starting to see location services. How do the people feel? The How Do the People Feel app has to all move in. We have to come up with standard methods of moving all of this data back and forth. The connection of clouds is another interesting thing. Now we have to connect clouds. So almost what's happening is the master systems integrators needs a master systems integrator that integrates them all. And probably the closest we've got in our industry to that is Scott Cochran. But in addition to that, we're now seeing, as we start to pull in engagement platforms and a lot of those other pieces, we see, I'm kind of kicking it around calling it the professional systems integrator, and he needs to, he is the person that actually starts pulling these master systems integrators. So we'll actually have let's say there's the engagement platforms in this project, and we have to basically pull that together. So he has to start seeing that level of integration. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of pieces.
What about we keep our MSI, but we call it managed systems integrator.
Yeah.
I like that.
I like
Kenny.
that. That's a good acronym. Yeah.
Great vocab. Okay, now Ken Sinclair, real quick. I just got a call from several control vendors. Chris Eichmann was on the phone, some other people too, and they want to know, okay, you understand the master systems integrators part, but what are the control vendors? How do you put your control vendor hat on? Now you're a vendor. What do you do to stay in the game? I mean, we know what the master systems integrators need to do. What do the control vendors need to do? Or do they just need to get in the equipment business and just put, like you said, make their equipment open and sell equipment, because the controls are going to be mute, whatever.
Moot. Stick with moot.
Well, I'm looking at my mute button here. That's
mute. I don't know. I can only see the control industry growing. I mean, we talk about all this stuff, but the average building, some of them don't even have DDC yet, and that's a golden opportunity to pull that in. There's actually another adjunct that I saw going on too, is if you think any of this is approaching stabilization, the entry of wireless into the building. I've been flapping my gums about that for a while back too. I was looking more at 5G and CBRS and LoRa and some of these technologies. I was part of a demo where they were basically showing some other mesh. So as we move away from wire, basically everything we're talking about here is based on an IP network, an Niagara network. If you want to get out of your head, imagine in a new building as we start to move to wireless sensors and wireless networks that are not particularly IP. Interesting. Mesh networks that repeat, have their own little funny control languages, their own little funny standards. And this stuff can be rolled out extremely fast. And when you're all done, it can be converted to Haystack and converted to Ash or BACnet or whatever you want, and served back up to you. I think we're at the point now that we're starting to see wireless devices, born again wireless devices, that the first generation was built to connect to our networks. The next generation, I think, is going to challenge again. Was BACnet the best standard? Was the Haystack, I think, will go, because you got to keep naming this stuff, because every time you get more data, you got to figure out how the heck you're going to manage it. But that some of these systems will actually leap over. And if you kind of imagine that we started out with that complex network that you talked about of subcontrollers talking to these controllers and RS-485 going up here, going to Ethernet and cloud and all that stuff. So we had this basically architecture that filled a page, and then we started moving to an open architecture, and it becomes a little flatter. And with the engagement platform, that also fits into this flatness. So we have this flat network, but poof, what happens when the network disappears? It's wireless.
Well, you said so many good things again. It's hard to catch up to where you were at, but you said something that kind of the wireless thing too is certainly an interesting aspect, because as it gets better and more robust, it's going to have the first couple generations of wireless went through some crash and burn scenarios, all the way from the carbon monoxide wireless in parking garages, and just getting over the barriers and whatever, and learning it, and then the footprints getting smaller, and the battery getting more potent, and everything's mesh, so it takes care of each other. But you said something earlier about about this abracadabra style. We talk about all this great technology is going to happen overnight, where the buildings, the reality is the true reality, the Paul Oswald reality. And it's back to Paul Oswald. I will never forget from one of the collaboratoriums, he goes, analytics, clouds. He goes, fix the fan belts, replace the bearings. Are you guys kidding me? What are you talking about? And who's fighting over who's got the best cloud? He goes, every one of these buildings gets down to the mechanical equipment and the operations, and having the skills to replace that stuff quickly, and the diagnostics being true, and spending every dollar wisely. If you had $10,000, you'd buy analytic package, or do you go fix the motors, or put a VFD down there to start saving. So the reality is that we have like tectonics. I always enjoyed plate tectonics when it was explained to me how one part of the world, the geographic plates, tectonic plates are crashing in, and you've got, volcanic activity and whatever, and the other ones, they're flat and they're solid and stable, and you've got, just a really, calm geographic area. Well, our industry is like that the truth is that if you have any part of this, and that's where that co-opetition comes in, and this collaboration we're talking about, is that there's so much market out there. And if people could just, understand it, if they got some of these tools and some of this technology and got some marketing together and got some people trained, they could go to a lot of these buildings and really truly make a good living, and help the help the long-term goals of smart grid and automated demand response. I mean, it's feasible now because the technology is here, but connecting those dots and getting into each one of these buildings. I drive by at least 10 buildings a day where the lights are on. I drive by certain parts of the highway where lights are on, and I can't stand it. I wish there was a 1-800 number you could call and complain about lights being on, because it's just such a waste of money, and it's just a failure of a time clock. So we have all kinds of power outages happening here, and it happens in our own house. We have to reset the microwave and the oven clock, and all our little timers are all screwed up now because of the power loss, right? But the reality is that we're not really and truly cool enough yet to get these things, to really use the technologies that we're talking about, because we can't get the basic stuff done. And it really, if you had your first magic wand, let's say you had 3 wishes, Ken, what would be your first wish? Where would you go? Would you root for that perfect controller that has the layer caked style, or where would you put your first magic wish to get stuff done and make this place or our Earth, more energy efficient, more, where would be the first magic act?
Well, I think a lot of our sessions were focused on basically the Generation Z, and Generation Z is coming into the workspace. They're an interesting group. They are born connected. They can't imagine what we're talking about. Like, what are you talking about? Resetting the microwave. So the next microwave you buy will probably not blink at you. It will basically get its time from the network, and and you and Alex will have a relationship with it, or hey, Google it to turn it on. So it's going to be born connected. So I think that's the savior. Is what we need to do is to instill save the earth type thinking into them, and ironically enough, they've grown up in school with that. They've done the projects. They're already there. We're probably the biggest obstacle, and we're in their way. We need to get out of their way. But there is a bunch of stuff. Our legacy system will keep us legacy for the rest of our lives. It's
Sure.
Our legacy systems are so complicated that nobody can actually take that away from us, and the investment is such in them that we need to build bridges to them. So what we need to do is we need to enable and work with Generation Z. We need to better understand what they understand, and they have to understand what kind of a mess we've got here and how we have to fix it.
You indirectly answered Eric's question about if you were a vendor, what would you do? And the thing what you said about the legacy, that's for sure. That's for real. In other words, there's different parts of that tectonic thing I was trying to get to, is that there's going to be enough legacy business that's going to keep vendors very, very busy for a long time. And it's just kind of, it will melt. It's like a giant iceberg or a giant glacier that's, it's so big and so massive that right now you can't handle the reality that it's all going to be gone one day, but it will be. It'll evolve into another market, and that market will surely pass away into something like you said, the Zen market. But there'll be enough legacy work to keep everybody going.
Yeah, but the other thing that's happening too, and you just have to watch the major companies. So they're hiring like crazy. They're hiring young folks. I have a barometer on that in my LinkedIn network, which is, gosh, it's almost approaching 18,000 now, and I'm getting like 400 or 500 a month joining, which is totally amazing. But who they are is they're the new grads that are starting with the large Siemens, Schneiders, and what you can see clearly what's happening is these major companies are preparing themselves for the transition, that they're no longer a hardware physical control company. They are basically a software company. And the other thing that happens to them is that the product becomes less important. And we got examples of that we can go back and look at. Let's let Johnson Controls, because that's my roots. So let's look at Johnson Controls. I mean, when I started, they poured those valve bodies in brass, and they made those pneumatics, and that was their hold was their product. And as they evolved, they moved to electronic controls, was sort of less of a thing. And as they moved to computer controls, they actually tried to own their own computers, which was a terrible mistake. And it held them back because they didn't use open computers. But eventually then they migrated to systems that did use open computers. Keep on going. Then we basically buy EasyIO. So what you can see is, to answer Eric's question, what are the folks that build these products doing? They're evolving. They're evolving from making a product to selling software and becoming software companies. That's the evolution that's occurring, and the folks that are coming in they're born connected. They're just coming into a software company as far as they're concerned. They need to learn about the legacy, and it's interesting because they come up with some pretty innovative ways of picking up our old legacy systems, especially if they have some kind of a standard. They'll just say, write a driver for that. I can do that. I'll be back. I'll have it by noon tomorrow. That's the kind of stuff they can do. So it's different. And so our value becomes, as always, our value is our people in our industry, not our products, not our technology. It's just the amount of people we have and the amount of innovation they can bring to market.
Wow. And I tell you, talking about the people, Ken, there was another great session I think you helped set up. It was moderated by Therese Sullivan. It was basically, some of the most powerful women in our industry talking about how do we attract more women into the industry, because I think that's where we're going to see a lot of this makeup, if you will, people that are retiring. We've got to attract all people to our industry, but women seem to be a particularly good resource for that. Any thoughts on that session?
Yeah, I think one thing that always excites me is our industry is such that it takes you at least 5 to 10 years to figure out all the acronyms and be able to talk funny like everybody else. So once you achieve that, and we actually have a tremendous amount of women in our industry that have been providing supporting roles, and they know how to talk. They know all these products. They know that product doesn't work with that product, and they have this incredible knowledge of our industry. And so I'm thinking they're the fastest to market to basically push into leadership, and they also very much greet the engagement platform, that whole people side. I think we've always kind of tried to ignore those darn people in the building, but I think the women, that's their first concern is, are the people in the building happy? What do we have to do to make that happy? So they have that empathy that possibly we lack, and with the basic knowledges they have of products, and again, that for most of us, I think our ace in the hole is our connection to legacy systems, and we'll be all selling products that, like your new products, they will have some of these. They'll be born connected, but the one that's going to sell best is the born connected one that connects to everything that we've already done. Which is of course not available, but it's the one that comes closest to that is probably going to be your best selling product.
Well, what you said about the women thing is really an interesting thing. I have 2 daughters, and I always had, we have our Christmas holidays just gone by, and for some reason we were waxing nostalgic, and they were telling me how I was so obsessed with different things when they grew up, and then I got to hear myself. But I basically raised my daughters as boys because I knew from my experiences that they weren't going to get a fair chance, because Title IX brought all the funding for the scholarships. When I was looking at my daughters and their futures, I was determined that they were going to get become good athletes, and I was going to work together because we'd have something to do. So we played tennis together, whatever. They evolved into very good tennis players, very competitive, and because of Title IX, the colleges and university have to spend 50% of their budgets on females. And so the athletic sports, the women finally had to surge in volleyball, swimming, tennis. There was all these major universities were spending money to develop women's sports. And it was a very great benefit to a lot of young ladies that were good athletes, otherwise would not have played Division I college, sports. Taking that to another level, we got to hear a woman that was in the BAS, basically the contracting business for 40 years, and she was met by a woman that was in the business for 20 years in that breakout that Therese led, and it was extraordinary to hear the history. It was like watching a movie of these personal testimonies of how hard it was back when they started, sitting on a bucket. And then Aaron DeFries from Link Spring kind of carried that torch too. She went from the being a contractor back in the days when she worked for her father, basically. So it was a family tie, but learned contracting from the ground up. And now she's, she runs the technical support for Link Spring. And, and then there was a woman in the back talking about the 3 I's. Do you remember that, where she said, about women and how, you have to make an invested interest. You have to have the intent to hire women. And then when you do, you have to create the image that it's a very positive and very beneficial, development in your corporation or your organization. And I can't remember what the 3rd I was, but it was just an amazing 3 I type things about, how the future is going to have a lot more women in it, and then they're going to go from those support roles that you mentioned, Ken, into the leadership roles, and they bring with them a different set of empathies and a different set of capabilities. It's really kind of cool because it seems to have been absent for a couple hundred years in our societies, maybe a couple thousand. In fact, there's a couple theories on that books
right.
to read about that.
Well, let me hop in, Kenny, because I think you bring up a great point, and I think our industry, has embraced it. We got so many great leaders. I mean, Aaron DeFries is one you mentioned. We think about Jenny Stentz from Johnson Controls, and of course, the executive of the year for the small manufacturer was Gina Elliott from EasyIO. So I think one of the really cool things about our industry, at least on the smart building control side, is I think we, see the value and have embraced the fairer sex, and they're doing a great job. So thrilled with that. Ken, as we wrap up a little bit, can you
let me just add to that
Sure.
one before you leave it, because our March issue is
that's what I was going to ask, what the March issue
it's
is
been
about.
taken over by the women because it's International Women's Month, and we've got there's Women's Day is inside of that. So we basically it was actually Monica from Optical that helped pull this together in her last article. It's in our February issue, which is why you should hire a woman. It explains what's happening, and so they're taking over, and all of our articles for March are going to be certainly written by women, and they're starting to roll in right now. And it's interesting because they don't read much different than our ordinary articles. They're talking about the technical bits and pieces, more some of the people things that we have to deal with, and it's great. So
I gotta acknowledge you. I mean, you are the youngest 50-year-old I've ever met. I mean, because one of the big things with Instagram, for example, is Instagram accounts is somebody will take over somebody's Instagram account for a day or a couple of days or whatever. And I think you're starting a new trend here. It's like, hey, these people are going to take over automated buildings for the March issue, which is really cool. You're just such a zetter. You went from being a millennial to a zetter, Ken. What's up with that, brother?
I can't grow any older. I got to start growing younger.
He's born again connected, Eric.
Yeah, that's
born
right.
Again. He's like the Picasso of our industry, man. Remember, Picasso said the secret to his success was he just got younger every year. So, dude, can we come over to your house and play? But hey, listen, we have Ken Sinclair, AutomatedBuildings.com. Check it out. Great stuff, Ken. Man, keep it up. It's fantastic. And then listen, I think today's episode marks, a couple of new things. If you listen to this, and one of them is when you see Alper Uzmaler, he is now Alper Einstein, and Ken Sinclair started a new trend, which is, hey, we're going to take over automated buildings for the month. I mean, maybe we'll do it, Kenny. Maybe we'll let somebody take over Control Trends for a week, or, take over Johnson Controls or Honeywell. I mean, it could be interesting. You start a new trend, Ken, you trendsetter, you. So, all right, brother. Well, listen, appreciate it. Kenny, anything else before we hop off with Ken Sinclair?
No, it's been a fabulous hour again. I think we make light of it and we talk very topically over these subjects, but I really think we're hitting some huge themes. And the more I'll probably think about a lot of the stuff we said, and it'll be great to write the post about it. But I think that the things you've captured here recently, Ken, are very important, very critical. And every year you put that big episode on 12 breakout sessions, another just major, prodigious work, because we know how hard that is. And so once again, thanks and congratulations. Eric did a great job recording it for posterity. But I think we're at that pivot point. Again, I just feel like we're leaving like a platform and stepping onto a newer platform that's raising. the game and the capabilities. And the thing you said about the generation coming in behind, it's so correct about the young people. They're coming into these corporations and they're not making products as much as they're making software. And, I mean, and all the big guys have it, all the Siemens, Honeywell, they've all got that big cloud thing. And it's going to be, if you're not connected, you can't be part of that. So it's good for our people and our industry to understand that there, whatever ambitions you have in your house, whatever kind of technologies you like to play around with, you need to keep pushing that feeling, that sense of adventure and that sense of curiosity. Because if you don't, you'll be left behind.
Okay, I'd like to close up too with, since you've acknowledged Alper, because Alper really has changed the industry. But what I saw too is Zach created this layer cake drawing and basically showed where all of these positions of open occur. And Calvin has built a complete open controller that actually runs Alper's Sandstar. And Brad and I are sitting there, and these guys are talking, and I look at Brad and I said, "Do you know what they're talking about?" Once they start talking, it goes into another level. I get to see the result, but I think that's the other thing is everybody needs a support group, and I think Alper has found us a support group in our young contributing editors. I am so amazed by these guys. They're just knocking it out of the park on every thing. They're actually also turning into excellent orators, as well as writing. Some of their writings are amazing too. So there's no doubt in the next 20 years of automated buildings, these guys will be writing the history of what's going on.
Well said, Ken. There you go. AutomatedBuildings.com, Ken Sinclair. Ken, as always, thanks so much for taking some time to be with us.
Okay.
Great stuff from Ken Sinclair. Man, there's just so much there. We're probably going to listen to this 2 or 3 times, but was there anything in particular that really stood out with Ken's comments on this particular episode for you?
Yeah, the Born Connected. I mean, he when he ran over the digital native for a while, I didn't know exactly what he meant by digital native back when, and that was the person who grows up where the iPhone is part of their physical makeup. That they're connected to their phone in a way that we weren't. We had to learn how to become iPhone users or the other smart device users, so we weren't native to that, and I understood it. Now Born Again, I understand now much more clear that he's talking about products and people that already come out of the box completely ready to connect to the latest and greatest technologies and make the concepts of technology, integration of technologies and unified integration and total room automation. It makes more sense because we're talking about a bit more, and all these fancy jargon words or whatever are starting to really come out and make sense, like some of the other trends that we've had in the past where, you kind of talk about it, you really don't understand it. But now I think because Ken St. Clair has really captured it and really taken the time to define it with examples or whatever, he's a great teacher.
Well, he is. And, there's that song I think Lady Gaga had called Born This Way. So I wonder if somebody's going to come with a Born This Way controller. But I tell you, it's a tall order for the vendors. I mean, we talked around it a bit, Kenny, and that's the piece that comes back for me. If I'm a vendor, I'm going, what the heck, because you got legacy you're having to deal with. You got these people come from outside the industry, the Beagle boards, the Raspberry Pis, all these new people that are coming in. And we've said this on the show before. It almost seems like it's an advantage if you don't have legacy system, meaning you're coming in able to design something just straight out of the box for where the industry is now. And we've often talked about if some of the major manufacturers had that luxury, they would probably design different type control systems. So it's interesting times, and then sort of getting back to the whole thing about the temperature control contractor being extinct. What I gleaned from our conversation is, you might be extinct as a temperature control contractor, but you also might have the best market of all, because you understand enough about the building automation controls that you can interface with the customer and talk to the master systems integrator. But it seems like the money's going to be the guy that's going in and fixing the belts and adding the VFDs and making sure the valves are opening and closing and all that maintenance stuff that we talk about that costs so much energy, the Paul Oswalt effect, if you will. So, it makes me kind of wonder if being the master systems integrator, if you and I were going to start a company today, would we go into that part of the business, trying to compete with the Brian Oswalds and those people, or will we go into the business where we just understand the systems, but understand the importance of making sure the equipment and all that functions correctly and be able to talk to those guys in such a way that we're their go-to?
Well, I think Mike Marson, once upon a time, when we were eating breakfast one time, he took a napkin, he drew a little thing about the triangle, remember, and how he flipped it over, inverted the triangle. He wanted to get to that deep and wide market. You can have the pinnacles and you can fight over the most iconic buildings and integrations in the country, in the world, or whatever, but the real market, and what's really exciting to me is that we've watched the race to the small space really take off about 5 years ago for sure. It actually got into really is competitive stuff. Johnson, Honeywell, Siemens, everybody launched a product line structure where it came into people's hands, and the Viconics room controller was an amazing product. So we're seeing all these products now that are now the barriers to get to that big part of the market. So when they get in this conversation, some people are talking about a very small part of the market where they're going to total integration of the hardest types. Some people, when they had this conversation, they're thinking about service contracts, and they're thinking about malls, and they're thinking about schools and much market, municipalities, university schools, and hospitals. So everybody has a different concept of where this conversation takes them, and then there's enough room for everybody. So that you're right, the technician that gets that's right now that's making a good living, any of the trades that are out there, whether you're an electrician or a steam fitter, you have the world by the new short hairs.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. There's enough to go around. There's more than enough to go around in this industry. It's just where you're going to play. Right. And again, I think the people that might have the biggest challenges are the controls manufacturers. And I think maybe that's why we're seeing some of these mergers where Johnson's buying equipment companies, Honeywell, everybody, Siemens. They're buying all these companies to create these bundles. Because if you think about it, Johnson Verisys is a great example. They own York equipment. That comes embedded in the York equipment. So now instead of installing a controller, you just basically connect to it, right? So, this whole sort of connected thing seems to be a trend too. So to your point, and I think we can just sort of maybe wind up on this or end on this, is that it's not a question of whether you can play or not. It's just a question of where you're going to play. And that's going to change. If you're eating at the same place in the trough every single day, that place might not be there, but the trough goes on forever. You just might have to move down a little bit to find where you're going to eat next.
Yeah, and I think you're going to have to learn how to make partners and become part of this managed services. I think we came up with a new term. At least I feel as though the managed systems integrator instead of the master systems integrator. The master systems integrator was a very important term that I felt as though it came out of Realcomm Ibicon 6 years ago with Jim Young. In one of our interviews, he's talked about the master systems integrator. And then we went on a quest to find out how many master systems integrators were there, and we realized there weren't very many of them, and ESI being one of them, and some of the other guys that we talked to over time. And then what's his name, Rick Warner, his company, there were people that were designed to go after the large integrations. Jason Hauk and Ted Hauk with Hepta Systems, and so we got to meet some of these really heavy duty players. But then the since that time, we've seen the development of IT come into to almost like BACnet slowly. It's lawn out now. It's way ahead of lawn, and lawn's I'm not saying it's antiquated or out there, but we don't sell much lawn anymore because people don't want it. And now we're seeing the same thing with integration. Used to be integration just for very specific things, and now it's integration of everything on the network, and that brings in a whole different set of players and a whole different. Like Ken said, what do you call that creep? The functional creep. That all of a sudden you got to learn about this, and this, and this just to get to there, just to get to where you used to go to, and take care of business. Now you got to go talk to the IT guy.
That functional creep term, Kenny, is that a dating term? Did the women in our industry come up with that, but not related to controls, but to
probably it probably could be used in both things. That you could be a functional creep in terms of a noun, or
Yeah.
functional creep as in terms of an adverb. You know?
Adjective. Yeah, I got you. Well, listen, before, as we kind of wind it down, because we went long with Ken Sinclair, we could have gone much, much longer. That guy's just brilliant. So again, thanks to Ken Sinclair. But when we sort of look at what's coming next, Kenny, we got Niagara coming up in April, right, in San Diego. That's
Mhm.
going to be a phenomenal event. And then we've got Rokam Ibicon coming up in Miami in June. So
Right.
check Control Trench for that. You're going to want to be at those 2 sessions. And with that, big dog, you're getting ready to head out right now to the West Coast. And
Yep. I'll be at the Siemens Talon VAP Summit, and yep.
Nice. Well, very, very good. Well, listen, I think with that, buddy, we call it cookies here. We call it a wrap. What was the word you used? We Zeppelin out. We Zeitgeist out.
Zeitgeist. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, there you go. That's another week on Zeitgeist Trends with Ken Sinclair, the German myth, the myth, the legend. So with that, remember, be bold, stay in control, stay relevant, and be a zeitgeist.
Indeed, Eric.
Indeed, Kenny Smyer. So is that
All right.
zeitgeist as a noun or a verb?
Zeitgeist, it would be it would be a term. Again, the spirit of the times. I think that's the correct definition.
Well, I know the definition, but is that a noun, verb, or an adjective? You just go away and
Even being the zeitgeist is probably a reference to a noun.
you call me a noun. Don't call me a noun. I'm definitely a noun. I am not a noun. So, although it's okay.
Sliding,